Daniel shifted the car into park and stared at the towering gate in front of him. It loomed out of the fog like the ribs of some ancient creature, black iron streaked with rust, heavy chains looping across it in thick coils. Beyond the bars, he could barely make out the outline of a massive house. The mansion's windows were hollow, lifeless. One of them flickered faintly, as though catching light from a world that no longer existed.
Ow.
The woman in the back seat leaned forward slightly. Her hair brushed her shoulders as she raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the gate. "This is home," she said.
Ow.
Daniel frowned. "Are you sure? Nobody's lived up here for years." Her eyes met his through the mirror. They were wide, glossy, reflecting the faint green glow of the taximeter. "You should open the gate." A chill ran through his arms. "Yes, I can't do that. It's private property. Can't trespass." The woman smiled, then slowly, deliberately. "You've already crossed the line." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked back toward the mansion, trying to think rationally. Maybe she was drunk. Maybe she was ill. Anything was better than the cold realization creeping through him. "Look," he said carefully, "I'll drop you here if you want. But I can't stay." She didn't reply. Instead, she reached into her small purse and pulled something out. Her fingers, pale and almost translucent, uncurled to reveal an old coin, tarnished and dark. She placed it gently on the seat beside her. "For the ride," she whispered. Daniel turned halfway in his seat. "Miss, it's all right. You don't..." The air inside the taxi shifted. A sharp, unnatural cold filled the cabin, and the faint mist from outside began creeping in through the vents, though the windows were sealed shut. The radio crackled again then, without warning, burst into static that sounded like whispering voices. He reached for the ignition, his pulse hammering, but froze when he realized something. The woman's reflection in the mirror was gone, but when he turned around, she was still sitting there, her lips curved upward again, that same eerie half-smile. She tilted her head slightly and said, "Thank you for taking me home, Mr. Wong." Daniel froze. He had never told her his name. The door handle clicked. Slowly, she stepped out of the taxi, her white dress brushing against the wet ground. He could hear nothing, not her footsteps, not the wind, not even the hum of his own engine. The world had gone silent. As she reached the gate, she pressed her hand against the rusted chains. The metal shuddered under her touch, then began to crumble into dust. The gate creaked open with a long, low moan that scraped through Daniel's bones. The woman turned back toward him one last time. Her face looked different now, older, her skin gray, her eyes hollow and distant. "Drive safe," she said, though her voice sounded like it came from somewhere deep underground. Then she stepped through the gate and vanished into the fog. Daniel sat frozen in place for what felt like hours. When he finally looked down, the old coin she had left on the seat was gone. The back seat was completely dry.
Daniel sat motionless, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The world around him felt suspended, the fog outside pulsing with a faint glow like something breathing beyond sight. His instincts screamed for him to leave. He reached for the gear shift, but his body refused to move as if the chill that filled the car had frozen him from the inside out. Finally, with a trembling hand, he twisted the key in the ignition. The taxi's engine sputtered, coughed once, then roared weakly to life. He exhaled shakily, forcing his foot onto the gas pedal. The tires spun against the damp road before catching traction. As the vehicle rolled forward, he glanced once more through the rearview mirror. The gate stood open now. Beyond it, there was nothing but no mansion, no path, no light, just a swirling void of grey mist, as though the entire estate had been swallowed by the mountain itself. A violent shiver ran through him. He pressed the accelerator and sped down the hill, the headlights cutting thin tunnels through the fog. Each twist of the road felt endless, the curves repeating like a looped nightmare. His pulse thundered in his ears, louder than the hum of the tires. After several minutes of driving, the fog began to thin. The trees reappeared, and the city lights flickered faintly below. Daniel dared to breathe again. Then he noticed the meter. The digital screen, which had been ticking throughout the ride, now flashed 0 o'clock. The number reset itself completely. He frowned, tapping it with his finger, thinking it might be a short circuit. But when he looked closer, he saw something that made his stomach twist. Condensation forming on the inside of the glass, the faint outline of a handprint pressed against it from within. He jerked his hand back and nearly swerved. His heart pounded so hard he thought he might pass out. "It's just the fog," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Just the fog." But the air inside the car was dry. He pulled over to the side of the road, breathing hard, trying to steady himself. The silence was absolute. No cars, no wind, no sound except the ticking of the cooling engine. Then, faintly from the back seat, came a soft rustle. Daniel whipped around. The back seat was empty. The seatbelt that had been neatly folded earlier now hung twisted and unbuckled. The faint scent of rain lingered in the air. That's when he noticed the floor mat. Something small and dark rested against the edge. He leaned closer and picked it up, a coin. Old, tarnished, the same one she had shown him. His blood ran cold. He threw the coin onto the passenger seat, started the engine again, and sped off toward the city, refusing to look in the mirror. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was sitting just behind him. He could sense it, the faint weight on the seat, the pressure of unseen eyes fixed on the back of his neck. By the time Daniel reached the first gas station near Central, the eastern horizon was beginning to lighten with dawn. He parked under the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights and stepped out on shaking legs. He walked around the taxi once, just to prove to himself that he was alone. Everything looked normal, no footprints, no fog inside the car, and yet, when he opened the back door, the seat was damp. He closed it carefully, his hands trembling. Never again, he muttered to himself. Never driving that road again. But even as he said it, part of him knew he would, because drivers like Daniel don't just carry passengers. Sometimes the road carries them.
For days after that night, Daniel tried to convince himself it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. He told no one at first, not even his wife. Every time he closed his eyes, though, he saw her again, the woman in white, the empty eyes, the faint smile through the mirror. Sometimes he woke drenched in sweat, swearing he could still feel the cold weight of her presence in the car. At the end of the week, he drove back to work, forcing himself to keep the same route to prove he wasn't afraid. The night traffic hummed as usual. The lights of Kowloon shimmered across Victoria Harbor, and people laughed and smoked under neon signs. Everything looked perfectly normal, yet something had shifted in him. Every reflection caught his attention now. Shop windows, the taxi's mirrors. The glass doors of restaurant Saul seemed to hold faint movement just outside his line of sight. He'd blink, and it would vanish. Around the third night, it began again.
Nice.
He picked up a middle-aged man outside a bar in Wan Chai. The passenger slumped in the back seat, silent except for a deep, rasping breath. Daniel caught a glimpse of him in the mirror, his skin pale, his eyes half closed. At first, Daniel assumed he was just drunk. But when they reached the address he'd been given, Quiet Street near Kennedy Town, Daniel turned to wake him and found the seat empty. The door hadn't opened. The meter was still running. The man was simply gone. Daniel slammed the brakes, his heart racing, jumped out, opened the back door, looked under the seats. Nothing. But the seat was wet again, just like before, damp and cold, as though something had been sitting there for hours. He didn't sleep that day. Word began spreading among the other drivers. At the midnight diner on Nathan Road, they noticed how pale he looked, how quiet he'd become. "You've been driving Peak Road, haven't you?" one of the older men asked. "That place pulls you back." Everyone knows that. Daniel tried to laugh it off. "I'm fine, just tired." But he wasn't fine. The next week, a woman flagged him down outside the hospital at Queens Road East, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked exhausted but calm. "Can you take me home?" she asked softly. He nodded and helped her in. Halfway through the trip, the bundle shifted slightly. The driver's mirror tilted, and for an instant Daniel saw what was inside. A baby gray-skinned, eyes open but unmoving. He nearly veered off the road. When he looked back, both mother and child were gone. Only the smell of disinfectant lingered. That was when Daniel stopped denying what was happening. Something had attached itself to him that night on Peak Road. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was all of them. Whatever it was, the barrier between worlds had thinned, and he was the one paying the price. He started avoiding mirrors altogether, driving with the rear view turned toward the ceiling. He prayed at the small roadside shrines before each shift. His wife noticed the incense burns on his arms, the hollow look in his eyes. "You're scaring me," she said one night. "Quit this job before it kills you." But Daniel couldn't stop. He told himself it was duty, that the bills wouldn't pay themselves. But deep down, he knew the truth. The road was calling him. He could feel it every night, the same pull up the hill, toward the fog, toward the mansion that no longer existed. Some nights when he drove past the turnoff to Peak Road, he swore he could see a faint figure standing by the sign. White dress, still as stone, always waiting. By the third month, Daniel was barely recognizable. The shadows under his eyes seemed carved into his skin, and he'd grown quieter, moving through his shifts like a man half asleep. He still drove at night, always at night, though his family begged him to stop. Every time his wife mentioned selling the taxi, he just shook his head. "The road needs me," he'd whisper. "Some people still need a ride home." She didn't understand, and honestly, neither did he. Daniel pulled into the 24-hour Chachan Teng near Yomati. The place was a second home to every night driver in the city. Metal tables, greasy tiles, the constant rattle of walks. The smell of strong milk tea and fried noodles filled the air. He sat in his usual corner, nursing a cup gone cold. That was when a gravelly voice spoke behind him. "You've been driving the haunted routes, haven't you?" Daniel turned. The speaker was an old cabbie named Mr. Lau, a man who'd been on the road since before the handover. Everyone knew him, but few really talked to him. His hair was silver, his face lined like cracked leather, and his eyes, deep, sharp, watched Daniel as though he already knew the answer. Daniel tried to shrug it off. "Just tired, that's all." Mr. Lau slid into the seat opposite him. "You can lie to the others, not to me. I've seen that look before." "You've been marked." Daniel frowned. "Marked? What are you talking about?" The older man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "When you drive too long in the dark, the road begins to see you. You stop being part of the living crowd and start belonging to the other side. They know your roots. They wait for you because you re one of the few who can take them where they need to go." Daniel forced a dry laugh. "Make it sound like we're ferrying ghosts." They see you as a bridge between their world and ours. A driver who doesn't just take people places but spirits too. Daniel stared at him, half expecting a grin, a punchline, but Lau's expression was grave. From his coat pocket, the old man pulled out a small red cloth pouch tied with gold thread and slid it across the table. "Keep this under your driver's seat. It won't stop them from finding you, but it might keep you from going too far with them." Daniel hesitated. "What happens if I do?" The old man met his eyes, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You stop coming back." A silence stretched between them. Lau took a sip of his tea and added, "You know that mansion on Peak Road? They say a bride died. They hanged herself on her wedding night. Her family abandoned the house after that. Drivers used to see her by the gate. White dress, black hair, waiting for someone to take her home." Daniel's heart stopped. "A bride?" Lau nodded. "You saw her, didn't you?" Daniel didn't answer, but his silence said enough. "Then you need to understand something," Lau continued. "Ghosts aren't just echoes of the past. They're wounds that never healed. Violence, betrayal, injustice, they keep walking until someone notices. And you did." He stood slowly, patting Daniel's shoulder. "You've already been chosen, son. You just have to decide what kind of driver you'll be, the one who carries them, or the one who becomes one of them." As Lau left the diner, Daniel stared at the red pouch on the table. It looked harmless, yet the longer he stared, the more it seemed to pulse, as if something inside was alive and waiting. That night, he tied it beneath his driver's seat. For the first time in weeks, the road outside his window was completely still. The next few nights were different. The city felt quieter, heavier. Daniel still drove his usual route through Central, across the harbor, and up toward the hills. But the air around him no longer pulsed with cold. The faint whispers in his radio stopped. The shadows that used to shift in his mirrors stayed still. It was almost peaceful, almost still. Peace made him uneasy. He kept the little red pouch tied under his seat, its gold thread dull from wear. He never opened it, never dared. It was enough to know it was their reminder that the world he drove through was entirely his own. It was the beginning of Ghost Month when it happened. A humid August night, the kind where the mist clings to your windshield like breath. The city's shrines were alive with incense smoke and paper offerings, the smell of burnt joss filling the air. Daniel had nearly finished his shift when he saw her. A figure at the roadside near the old tram depot in Kennedy Towns Mall, fragile, her white dress fluttering faintly in the night breeze. She was waving for a taxi. Daniel's pulse spiked. His first thought was her. But this woman was older, her hair streaked with gray. Still, the way she stood, perfectly still yet somehow weightless, froze him. Every instinct screamed to keep driving. Instead, he slowed down. The woman opened the door and slid in quietly. "To Happy Valley, please," she said, her voice gentle, almost kind. He nodded and pulled away from the curb. For several minutes, neither spoke. The city lights shimmered across the windows, painting them in red and gold. Then she asked, "Do you ever wonder where all the lost people go?" Daniel hesitated, unsure if she meant the living or the dead. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "I think some of them just keep wandering." She smiled faintly. Her gaze turned toward the passing streetlights. "And some of them drive." Something about the words made him shiver. As they turned through the narrow lanes near Happy Valley, the woman pointed suddenly toward a small crossroads marked by a burnt-out lamppost. "Here," she said softly. "This is where I get off." Daniel stopped the car. But when he turned to face her, the back seat was empty. No sound, no door opening, just the faint smell of jasmine in the air. He exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel. A familiar weight settled in his chest, not fear this time, but understanding. For years, he had thought of ghosts as intruders, fragments of some darker world that slipped through cracks in reality. Now he saw it differently. Maybe they weren't haunting him. Maybe they were seeking something he'd lost too, a destination, a home, an ending. He left the meter running for a minute longer, then whispered into the quiet, "You're welcome." When he finally turned the taxi around, the road ahead was empty, smooth, endless. The city below flickered like a reflection on black water. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he was driving alone, felt surrounded by stories, by memories, by those who had ridden with him and those still waiting. As dawn broke, he pulled over by the harbor. The light spilled across the windshield, warm and golden. Daniel rested his hand on the steering wheel, the faint hum of the engine steady beneath his palm. He thought of Mr. Lau's words, "You just have to decide what kind of driver you'll be." He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "Maybe I'll keep driving a little longer," he said softly, "just to make sure they all get home." The waves lapped gently against the pier. A gull cried somewhere in the distance. And for the first time since that night on Peak Road, Daniel felt truly awake. Because in a city that never sleeps, some roads don't end. Just keep circling, carrying both the living and the dead toward whatever peace they can still find. There's something about Hong Kong after midnight that feels like another world entirely. The noise of the day fades into the distance, leaving behind the hum of neon signs and the low growl of engines echoing through narrow streets. The wet pavement glows red and blue under the city lights, and the air smells faintly of exhaust. Cheap noodles and rain that hasn't fallen yet. For most people, that's when the city finally sleeps. But for Daniel Wong, it's when his work truly begins. He's been a taxi driver for more than 20 years, long enough to memorize the city's heartbeat. By day, the streets are loud and impatient, filled with horns and shouting. But at night, when the last ferry has docked and the trams stop clanging, something else takes over. The city becomes quieter, older, like it's remembering things it tries to forget during daylight. Daniel doesn't scare easily. He's seen it all. Drunks passed out in the back seat, gangsters who pay too much to keep their mouths shut, lovers who argue until dawn. He's a practical man. Superstitions, ghost stories, and temple charms mean little to him. But every driver who works the night shift in Hong Kong hears the same warnings. Don't stop on Peak Road after midnight. Don't pick up anyone who waves at you from a blind corner. And if your mirror fogs up while the air conditioner is off, don't look at it. A2. Daniel, those were just stories drivers told each other to stay awake. He'd laughed them off countless times at the 24-hour Chichan Teng on Nathan Road, sipping his milk tea, while older cabbies whispered about passengers who vanished without paying, or shadows that moved on the back seat even after everyone got out. He thought fear was for rookies. That Friday night began like any other. His wife was already asleep when he left their apartment in Sham Shui Po. Their kids were grown and gone, one studying abroad, the other working in Shenzhen. The apartment felt emptier than ever these days. Driving gave him purpose, and the quiet of the city gave him peace, or something close to it. By 11:30 p.m., Daniel was already halfway through his shift. The harbor shimmered in the distance, ships blinking faintly like tired eyes. The radio played softly, old cantopop songs from the 80s, the kind that made him feel both comforted and lonely. He had just dropped off a fare near Mongkok and was heading toward the peak, hoping to catch late-night tourists returning from the lookout point. The roads uphill were almost empty, just winding ribbons of concrete climbing into the darkness. Street lamps grew sparse the higher he went, replaced by shadows that stretched and merged with the mist rolling down from the mountain. The silence was deep enough that he could hear his own tires against the road, the distant whine of cicadas somewhere in the trees. Then, as he rounded a curve near an old cemetery wall, the air inside the car grew inexplicably cold. His breath fogged faintly against the windshield, though he hadn't touched the air conditioning. Daniel frowned, reaching for the dial, but before his fingers found it, he saw her. Under a flickering streetlight stood a young woman dressed in white. She wasn't waving, just standing perfectly still, her long hair hanging damp over her shoulders. The night wind didn't seem to touch her. For a moment, Daniel thought she might be lost, or worse, hurt. Instinct made him slow down. The headlights caught her face as he approached, pale, expressionless, eyes downcast. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Daniel rolled down the passenger window halfway. "Miss, do you need a ride?" he called out. She lifted her head. Her eyes met his, dark and glassy. Then she nodded once, slowly, and moved toward the door. Something deep in Daniel's chest told him to drive away, but fatigue dulled the warning. He reached over and unlocked the door. The handle clicked. The door opened. Faint chill swept into the car. The woman slid into the back seat without a word. The smell of damp fabric followed her, sharp and cold, like air after heavy rain. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and stared straight ahead. Her hair, long and black, clung to her cheeks and shoulders, dripping faintly onto the seat. Daniel caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her skin was so pale it almost glowed beneath the dashboard light. "Where to, miss?" he asked, turning slightly in his seat. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost too soft. "Peak Road." Daniel blinked. "Peak Road, up by the mansion area." She nodded once. "The old one. Number 17. He hesitated. Peak Road was long and winding, lined with both luxurious houses and derelict ones left to rot after the war. The address she gave hadn't been in use for years. Still, she was already in the car, and refusing her didn't feel right. He pressed the meter button, forcing a professional smile. "All right, miss. Let's get you home." As he drove, the tires hissed against the damp pavement. The city lights below shrank into a sea of glitter, swallowed by the fog. The woman didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't even seem to breathe. Every time Daniel glanced in the mirror, she was in the exact same position, her eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. He cleared his throat. "So, late night, huh? You coming back from a party or something?" No answer. He tried again, forcing a chuckle. "You know, they say Peak Road is haunted. Some drivers refuse to come here at night. You believe in that kind of thing?" Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his in the mirror. Her lips parted and her voice drifted out like a whisper carried on cold wind. "You shouldn't joke about the dead." The hairs on Daniel's arms rose. He laughed awkwardly, more to fill the silence than out of amusement. Didn't mean any disrespect. It's just trying to stay awake. "You know how it is?" She said nothing more, but the air in the car seemed to grow heavier. The temperature dropped so suddenly that Daniel could see his breath again, faint white clouds forming with every exhale. He reached for the heater switch. The knob refused to move. The radio, which had been murmuring softly before, began to crackle. Static cut through the music, sharp enough to make him flinch. He twisted the dial, but the interference only grew louder, turning into distorted whispers. Then, for a moment, through the static, he thought he heard something else, a woman's voice singing, low and distant. The tune was old, maybe an old Cantonese lullaby his mother used to hum when he was a boy. He checked the mirror again. The woman was smiling. Not a wide, friendly smile. Just a faint curl of the lips, barely there, but unmistakable. Daniel's throat went dry. He looked away, focusing on the road ahead. The curves of Peak Road twisted like a serpent through the trees, each bend darker than the last. His headlights cut across wet stone walls and moss-covered signs. At one turn, he caught sight of something strange. Another reflection in the mirror behind her, like the outline of a second figure sitting beside her. But when he blinked, it was gone. His hands tightened on the wheel. He told himself it was the fog, the mirrors, the tricks of tired eyes. Nothing more. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't driving just one passenger anymore. The higher Daniel drove, the more the city below disappeared into a pool of fog and silence. The winding road narrowed, flanked by towering trees that clawed at the edges of the light from his headlights. It was nearly 1 a.m, the hour when Hong Kong's noise finally gave way to its ghosts. Even the insects had gone quiet. Daniel's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as he climbed. The air inside the taxi grew so cold that a thin veil of condensation began forming on the windows. Visible clouds. He rubbed at the glass with the back of his hand, but the fog returned immediately, like something breathing back at him from the other side. He tried to keep his focus on the road. "It's really late," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Must be an important visit." The woman didn't respond. She was staring out the side window now, her head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. Daniel followed her gaze, but all he saw were black trees and the glint of guardrails twisting down into darkness. He tried to lighten the mood. "You know, I used to drive up here every weekend when I was younger. Used to park by the lookout point, had the best view of the harbor. Not much left of those days now." Her voice drifted forward, soft and distant. "The view never changes, it just watches." Daniel froze. The words didn't make sense, but the tone chilled him. He glanced up at the rearview mirror. She was looking right at him through the glass. Not at his reflection, but at him, as though she could see through the mirror itself. Her eyes glistened darkly, catching the faint light of the dashboard. For a second, he thought he saw something move in her pupils, her reflection, or perhaps another face behind her own. The car hit a small bump, jolting him out of his trance. He gripped the wheel tighter and turned the radio dial, desperate for a sound other than her voice. Static hissed through the speakers again, followed by what sounded like faint breathing. He switched it off immediately. He risked one more glance in the mirror and nearly slammed on the brakes. The back seat was empty. His heart lurched into his throat. He whipped his head around. The seat was still empty. No sound, no trace that anyone had ever been there. And then, without a single sound, the woman's voice came from behind him. "You missed the turn." Daniel's hand shook so violently he almost lost control of the steering wheel. He looked up at the mirror again. She was there, sitting exactly where she had been before, her pale face serene, as if she had never left. Cold sweat ran down his spine. He forced a nervous laugh. "Sorry, roads up here are tricky," he said hoarsely, his throat dry as sandpaper. No response. The road wound higher, and the fog thickened until the headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead. Daniel could feel the car struggling uphill, the engine groaning as though it, too, wanted to turn back. The woman's reflection in the mirror flickered between visible and not. Like the taxi light was fighting to decide whether she was truly there. Finally, through the mist, an iron gate emerged. It was tall, rusted, and chained shut, standing before what looked like the outline of an old mansion buried in shadows. Daniel eased the car to a stop. "This is it," the woman said softly. Her tone was final, neither question nor suggestion.